All right, welcome back to the Boilermaker Breakdown. This is episode 3. I'm your host, Joey Hartzell, and I'm joined here with Ethan Woody. We are talking a little bit about basketball recruiting today. Some big news in the basketball world for Purdue, although albeit not great news if you're a Purdue fan. And then we're going to get into talking a little bit about that Notre Dame game 2 weeks ago in football and previewing the upcoming game against Illinois. Ethan, I'm going to throw it to your thoughts first. We're going to talk about Ralph Scott and Bo Ogden are the two big names, and Ralph Scott committed to Tennessee, Bo Ogden to Texas. Kind of your thoughts on the Purdue recruiting situation in general at the moment with the new breaking news that we've received.
Yeah, so I'll start with Ogden because we don't really need to spend much time on him. This is expected for a long time. Kind of talked last week. His dad is the quote unquote general manager for the Texas basketball program, so it was always assumed that he was going to play there. And he gave a lot of time to Tennessee and Purdue both, and gave them a chance to win him over. And ultimately, they just weren't able to beat out the promise of playing for his dad, albeit indirectly. So that was expected. Not a big loss there. Skill set wise, like we said, very, I don't want to say redundant, but very Weber, who's already committed. So uh, the bigger loss is Ralph Scott. We talked about this last week, how he is a skill set that Purdue doesn't usually get. He plays very differently from Purdue's current recruits and also to anyone currently on Purdue's roster. In recent years, the player he'd be most similar to would be Miles Colvin, but he's just a much higher rated recruit and much more defensively gifted than Colvin. And he's also much more of a 3-level scorer than Colvin really ever was. So imagine Miles Colvin with the ability to handle the ball and play defense. That was kind of the sell on Ralph Scott. And he, there was a lot of momentum for Purdue at the end there. People thought the timing of his visit, like the offer came in about 3 weeks ago. He immediately gets a midweek visit before his international trip with IMG and then sets his decision date. It sort of seemed like he had seen everything he needed to, and the Purdue visit was the trigger for it, which it might have been, but it ultimately didn't go our way. He commits to Tennessee, which I'll bounce it to you first. I have some more thoughts on sort of what the Scott recruitment says about what Purdue's chances are moving forward. But yeah, give me your thoughts on Ralph Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go back to Ogden for a second, especially like I don't know if you saw the picture of him and Kevin Durant from when Ogden was like a little like 2-year old and Durant was in Texas gear, and like seeing that picture kind of reinforces the thought process of like, wow, it speaks to how respectable of programs Purdue and Tennessee are to have made it such a hard decision for Ogden to commit to Texas. Like I know I saw some write-ups, I believe it was from Jamie Shaw or Joe Tipton, one of the two, that essentially said like this was not your average father-son recruitment. Like there very much was a real chance up until, kind of close to the end that Ogden ended up at Tennessee or Purdue. And that's like kind of unusual and probably speaks to how the kid's wired. He wanted to weigh his options, smart thing to do. Ultimately ended up at Texas, but I think fit-wise, it's not the end of the world with already having Weber committed. As you said, Scott he's an incredible player, and I think this is just something that Purdue fans are going to have to get used to. I think is that when you start playing in the deep end with big time recruits like a Ralph Scott, who's an uber talented recruit, you're now going head to head with programs who can offer every bit as much as you. Like in the Ralph Scott case, you're talking about a kid who is being recruited by Tennessee for a lot longer than Purdue has been recruiting him. Tennessee is, by most accounts, a very similar caliber program to Purdue. They don't quite have the top end success. I mean, Purdue has the Final Four. Tennessee doesn't have, but outside of that Final Four, Tennessee is every bit as successful as Purdue in the last few years. So it speaks to how much of a program that Rick Barnes has built, and also come be Dalton Connect, Chaz Lanier, Nate Ament, and to a lesser extent Kevin Durant in the Rick Barnes coaching tree is not a bad pitch. Like he seems next in line to be this kind of dynamic on-ball wing scorer that Rick Barnes has a knack for producing. Who wouldn't want to go play in that role? That role has had a ton of success.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. As much as we were talking about the momentum Purdue had, Tennessee and Houston were sort of considered the other finalists there. Texas A&M, I guess, too, though that has a little bit less of a track record with a brand new coach. both Houston and Tennessee have a better pitch for that type of recruit than Purdue does right now, right? Like everyone talked about how much of like a Houston wing Ralph Scott felt like, and they were considered leaders for a while until they kind of backed off their recruitment, which I'll come back to in a minute. But Tennessee, like you said, Chaz Lanier, Dalton Connect, like come be that, and he offers defensive upside as either of them did, right? So this is a huge win for Tennessee, and their fans should rightfully should be very excited to get him. Like you said, though, as Purdue starts playing in deeper waters with these higher level recruits, you're going to miss on a lot of them just because, Tennessee, other than the Final Four and I guess head to head results between the two programs in recent years, they're the same caliber of program as Purdue. Conference titles, top level seeds, second weekend March success. Really, the only thing, like you said, is the Final Four. And if you're, going up against that level of program, you're going to need, some killer thing, right? Like if Purdue had been the team that had been recruiting him all this time, and Tennessee comes in with their wing pitch, like maybe that's enough to shift. Purdue didn't really have that. Just like if this was like a top level center, maybe Purdue is able to come in and sneak because he's like, oh, I want to be Zach Edey, I want to be Trey Kaufman-Renn, whereas Tennessee doesn't really have that cell.
Right, and I think that it's almost not even really a miss as so much it is Tennessee just won the recruitment. Like Purdue didn't really miss. He was a late pivot from, I'm guessing, Colvin Landrew. He's why we got involved so late. Landrew's trending more and more away from Purdue by the day. That's kind of been a pipe dream since the visit, honestly. And Ralph Scott was a little bit of a late pivot. And this is what happens. I mean, you don't always get the guy you pivot too late. You don't have the relationship built. And I think it speaks to how well Painter has built the program and built a lot of recruiting momentum to even have had this much momentum in this recruitment. Like to make that Final Four at the last second, to have the momentum to offer and then immediately get a midweek visit. And you have people that are like, oh yeah, it's either Purdue or Tennessee.
Yeah. And
that speaks to what Painter has done with this program and recruiting wise. 2 years ago, I don't think Purdue has any shot of winning the Ralph Scott recruitment, even if they're involved from the beginning.
Yeah, and
I don't even think they get involved. Now they're pivoting to him late and getting a lot of momentum. And to an extent, eventually you need to win one, but I think that speaks to the direction the program's going.
Yeah, and talking about Houston for a second, I think the model Tennessee used to win the Ralph Scott recruitment is sort of a blueprint for what Purdue is going to need to do in the future to win some of these recruitments, right? Like Houston was the presumed front runner for a long time. They have other targets that end up backing off Ralph Scott. Purdue tries to get involved late, build some momentum. Ultimately, he wants to make a decision faster than he really has time to build a long-term relationship with his coaching staff. But where's Tennessee this whole time? Steady in their interest, a high-level program. They end up winning the recruitment. And I think that's kind of where Purdue's going to go in the future. It's probably not going to work out this way for any of the 2026 recruits, though I guess we'll see. But 2027, 2028, Painter's still looking at a lot of these high-level guys. Stay involved in these recruitments, right? If you compare it to a target this year, for example, Cam Williams, a guy everyone assumes is going to Arizona because he most likely is. What if Arizona backs off that recruitment? What if something happens and he's no longer interested there? Well, suddenly that's wide open again, and Purdue's been there the whole time, right? So that's kind of, I think, going to be the model. Not to say that Painter can't win a recruitment, like getting involved last minute or just be the first priority for a top-level recruit. I'm sure that'll happen as well at some point, but probably for these first couple of major top 20, top 30 recruits that he's probably going to get in the next couple of years, it's going to be just sort of a steady, slow play, long play, Purdue's hanging around. Oh, the favorite's backing off. Well, now Purdue has the commitment.
Yeah, the guy that I kind of see in the 27 class is having a chance to be that guy is like a Kevin Savage type. Depending on the service you look at, fringe 5-star, point guard. I feel like the two leaders I had seen early for him were Purdue and Auburn. And kind of with the Bruce Pearl news, I think that bodes well for Purdue kind of being the program out in front early. And they've got a great pitch for point guards. So that's a guy I kind of have my eye on in the future is hoping to get Isaiah Hill, another guy I think Purdue is pretty high on and probably has a little bit of a lead out in front. Talking about top recruits in the 27 class. But yeah, I kind of agree with you that's the pathway for Purdue to win recruitments now. And also the more that you hang around in the like final three lists of these top recruits, the more chances you give for something weird to happen and that recruitment to swing late to you.
Yeah, I mean, even going back a little bit, Caleb Swanigan back in the day was exactly this, right? The highest level recruit Painter's ever gotten was supposed to be a done deal to Michigan State until all of a sudden it wasn't, and then he comes to Purdue, and in 2 years is in the NBA. Like that, that's going to be, I think, probably the first couple of guys for the next couple of years. The first one or two recruits are going to be these guys who are Purdue's in the top three, maybe not the favorite. Something goes awry with the favorite, Purdue's right there, or just like Purdue's hanging around the top three of this recruit and this recruit and this recruit, and eventually one of them is going to pick Purdue.
Yeah, and I think that you talked about Cam Williams. I think I personally love Koa Pete. I think there's a world where he doesn't hit in an NBA way, and he might be back for year two, and he's just like, hey, Arizona, do you want to give me $3 million next year, and I'll just come back and play 35 minutes at the four and be an All-American again. And maybe I'll turn into a pro in year two. Maybe his game doesn't translate as well. I don't know. I don't think he's the most surefire prospect. I think there are a lot of ways that the Arizona thing could go south for Cam Williams, and all of a sudden Purdue's finding themselves as school number two that's been there from the very beginning, and you have a top 5, top 10 level prospect fall in your lap. And so just the more you hang around these recruitments, the more chances something weird could happen. We saw it last year with Cannon Catching. Something weird happened at the last second. There's no reason that something like that couldn't happen in Purdue's favor down the line with another really talented recruit. But I do tend to agree with you that the kind of relationship style recruiting that Painter has, where I feel like I don't know how much it's changed. I don't think it has changed a ton, even though he's starting to go for some higher level guys. But the honesty, family style program culture pitch, it will have to be the way to go.
Yeah.
Kind of switching gears a little bit. Let's get into talking about this Notre Dame football game. I think we can pretty safely say that Purdue was outplayed for most of that game. There were a few bright moments. That fun misdirection play, the Maccabee touchdown pass to Ryan Brown, I think was ruled a forward pass. But all around, kind of not the most successful game for Purdue. Can you speak a little bit to what you saw on kind of a bigger scale from Purdue and against Notre Dame?
Yeah, so final score is 56-30. Purdue scored a late touchdown. It was 56-23 at the end of the third quarter, and then backups really started to get some traction, especially at Notre Dame. Purdue fans in the moment were pointing this out, and it's undeniable. This was not as bad as last year's Notre Dame game. Notre Dame last year was week 3. It's our second game of the year. We had beaten an FCS team, I think 45-7, 45-0 against Indiana State. And
I think it was 49-0 actually.
49-0. People were kind of riding high. In hindsight, 7-0 at the end of the first quarter was maybe more reflective of the true reality of that game. But regardless, there's a lot of momentum going in. Notre Dame had just lost to Northern Illinois, and then we lost 63-3 or something like that. And it just sort of was the beginning of the end of the Ryan Walters tenure. This was not that. But I did want to kind of talk about, I do think Purdue fans are coming away from this game a little bit more positive than I think they should. This was still a 26-point beat down to a top 25 team. So, certainly a team that was supposed to be a playoff team, and, they still could get there. So this is not, this was not like losing to like a Northwestern or something like that. But Notre Dame from the jump had an advantage at every position on the field. And that was immediately apparent. This team just does not have the talent to hang with a Notre Dame. I do think it's notable that Purdue put as many points on the board as they did. I mean, this was a 35-23 halftime game with that weird weather delay with like 2 minutes before the end of the first half. But still, I mean, this was a game, at least a little bit. It was a 2-score game at the half. And, Notre Dame reels off 21 unanswered in the third quarter to really put this game away. But, Purdue had some chances, and I'm curious, let me bounce this to you real quick. What was your biggest takeaway on offense from this game for Purdue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of gave me a little bit of belief in Ryan Brown going forward. I think, he has some flaws, but he's a guy that kind of will get it done. Like he's a find a way kind of quarterback. Doesn't blow you off the page with any one part of his game, but he's a competitor, and I think that's worth something, especially at the quarterback position. Thought the wide receivers still had a pretty solid game. I think really the biggest problem is the offensive line just kind of got dominated for a lot of the game. They couldn't really run the football at all, and it's really hard to have a takeaway about like the ceiling of this offense when the offensive line was that bad. I think that the offensive line is kind of becoming the clear hole on this team, offensively at least, and I think that that's kind of the rate limiting step here. I kind of believe in the scheme a little bit. I think I saw some good things from the wide receivers. But yeah, I kind of tend to agree with you that this is not a game that we should really be taking away a lot of positive things. I have a little bit more faith in Purdue football than the bar being a 30-point loss in Notre Dame. That feels like a really, really low bar for me. And I don't think it really talks too much about the ceiling under Odom. I just think it talks to the ceiling of this roster. This roster is just lacking talent at a lot of different positions. And even where it's not lacking talent, it's lacking depth. And you have to have a good offensive line to win football games, especially at this caliber. And Purdue just doesn't have a good offensive line. And that's kind of my takeaway around the offensive side of things. Defensively, it was kind of just a free-for-all for Notre Dame for most of the game. They kind of got whatever they wanted. A large part of that was kind of an inability to tackle the running backs. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price both just killed Purdue. The Barry Odom tenure going forward is going to be a lot about who he can get into this program.
Yeah, on the Notre Dame running backs, they both averaged over 8 yards carrying, combined for 5 touchdowns. That's just not acceptable. And really, no matter who Purdue is playing, that's unacceptable. And I want to talk about the defense a little bit because, well, the offense showed some flashes. They are hampered by the offensive line, but the skill position players are pretty good, and Ryan Brown is making plays. This defense, as crazy as it sounds, might be worse than last year's. Going back to the USC game, it's now been 8 straight quarters. Purdue has forced 0 punts. USC and Notre Dame combined for 0 punts in those 2 games. USC scored 30 points because they didn't have to score more.
Yeah, and that
Notre Dame scored 56 points because they took pity on us in the 4th quarter. If either of those teams wanted, 70. Notre Dame could easily have had 70, maybe more. USC stopped going for it on 4th down, started kicking field goals once the score kind of got out of hand. Like this, both of these games, the scores I think are deceptively close.
Yeah,
which is a little bit scary given how big of blowouts both of these games were. USC won by 20, Notre Dame won by 26, and that feels like they were generously not by more. This Purdue defense is a problem. Guys who looked like they were solid, fundamentally sound players in the first 2 weeks have been anything but since then. Guys are missing tackles. The linebackers are slow to react. We get no pressure on the quarterback. Our corners, even Tony Grimes, really isn't able to stay with guys in man coverage. Guys are late to react in zone coverage. And it's tough to play. It's tough to sit back in zone coverage when you can't get any pressure on the quarterback. So then you try and bring blitzes to speed up the quarterback, which leaves your corners on islands that they can't cover on. So I'm not necessarily blaming Barry Odom schematically here. He does not have a talent this year. And kind of wanted to expand on this idea of like what this year is going to look like for Barry Odom and kind of what we want to judge him by. Because there's been a lot of talk of like, well, we know this is better than Ryan Walters. Do we? I mean, this, to be clear, much better than last year. But if you go back to Ryan Walters' first year, these are remarkably similar teams. And I think, I, for one, had hope that Ryan Walters year 2 would be good. He obviously was not. I don't think there's any reason to think Barry Odom will take that leap off the cliff that Walters did in year 2. But I also don't think we've seen anything in 4 games of the Odom era that makes us confident, or at least more confident than we're coming into the year, that he's the guy long term. And that's kind of what I want to push back on here. Is that's not to say I don't believe in the Odom tenure long term. I think he was the right hire. I think he can do great things with this program. I do want to pump the brakes a little bit on all the people saying like, oh, well, I know we got our guy. This is better coached. I just don't think that's true. This team commits a lot of penalties. This team is bad at tackling. Like, they're just things you can look at, like turnovers, sloppy plays, guys making blown coverages, like all that stuff. But it's often an indictment on coaching as well, not just the talent on the field.
Yeah, I think the thing I would push back on is just Ryan Walters year 1. I think there were a lot of good things to take away from. I don't think that Walters was fired in year 2 because of anything that happened in year 1. I think year 2 was such a disaster that it had to end. Like there was no option there. It didn't have anything to do with year 1. I think there was actually a lot of like good to take away from the first season and off season of Ryan Walters. I think even going into year 2, there were some things to like about that roster. There's a lot of talent, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Like we've talked about all the guys that transferred out, but also talking about adding a guy like Terrion Grant, who was supposed to be just like a really high level recruit at corner, and he didn't really work out much at Purdue. A guy like Coy Beasley never really saw the field and ever in a productive sense. So I think that if Odom goes on the Walters trajectory through year 1 and through offseason 1, I'm not concerned about that. That doesn't make me feel worried for the future, I think, is where I would push back on that. I do tend to agree with you that there's a lot to be said about whether or not he actually really looks like the guy long term, or if it's like, okay, you had kind of a baseline year 1. What does year 2 look like? That'll tell us a lot more. I think this 3-game stretch coming up after Illinois, when you talk about Rutgers, Minnesota, Northwestern, is where we find that out. If he goes 3-0 in that stretch, it's pretty clear, like, all right, the guy just, he loses games to Notre Dame when he's completely outmatched at every position roster-wise because he's in year 1 and Notre Dame's coming off of a college football playoff bid. We knew that our roster was nowhere close to Notre Dame's this year.
Right.
And so I think that if he shows up and wins every game that he's supposed to, the team looks a lot more functional, I think, than Ryan Walters' tenure. I think like body language is a lot better, even if the discipline on the field might not be that much better than year 1 of the Ryan Walters era. I do think that body language, like on the sideline and things like that, it feels much more cohesive and much more like a team than I think Ryan Walters' teams did. And so that's kind of why I have faith. I also think there's a track record of Barry Odom winning. So I think that if he does manage to get in competitive rosters, he has a track record of producing systems that win football games.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I'm not saying that Odom is going to fail. I'm not saying that he is Ryan Walters 2.0. What I am trying to caution Purdue fans, though, is if you're watching the games and you're coming away just from what you're seeing on the field and you're confident that he's going to be better from Ryan Walters, just based on what he's done so far this year, I don't think you should be. Let's put some numbers to this. This team is averaging about 15 yards more in total offense per game compared to Ryan Walters' first year, but they're averaging more points per game, more yards given up per game, have a worse turnover differential, and are averaging more penalties per game. So that's not to say that we should be panicking, because Ryan Walters year 1 was fine. I was personally optimistic going into year 2.
I was too. I was very optimistic.
I've just seen a lot of chatter from Purdue fans of like, oh, you can tell how well coached this team is. If anything, the opposite is true. This team does not look like a well-coached product on the field right now. And that goes beyond talent. Some of the decision-making in weird situations has been baffling. I've been very disappointed with his coaching decisions, like on-field coaching decisions when it comes to when to go for on 4th down, when to kick for points. He's kicking field goals in like weirdly cowardly moments early in games where he's a big underdog, almost like he knows he might not get back down here again and just doesn't want to shut out. Like there's just some concerning trends that I'm seeing. And, USC and Notre Dame are both top 25 caliber teams. I think USC technically did fall out after the loss to Illinois, but Jaden Mayava is probably going to be a first round pick, if not this year, then next year. Notre Dame is Notre Dame. They were in the national championship game last year. So I don't think you should take these losses as like signs that, Purdue is going to fail long term under Odom. But I do want to push back a little bit on the idea of like, oh, you can tell how well coached this team is, which is something I've seen across Purdue Twitter and different message boards and forums and things like that. I very strongly disagree with that. If anything, I think this team is currently a poorly coached product on the field.
Yeah, I think some of the coaching decisions have been kind of baffling. And I think part of that is just, sometimes every coaching decision you make looks bad when you play Notre Dame as Purdue. You go for it on fourth down, don't get it. You get down later in the game and it's still a competitive game. You kind of wish you took the field goal there at some point sometimes. But, I think part of what we're seeing is the two units, I think, that have been the worst out of the entire football team. In fact, I'll go to three, are make the team look the worst. I think when you talk about having a poor offensive line, a poor linebacker group, and a poor secondary group, that's ripe for people beating you badly because, when you can't stop anything on defense because in any down and distance, the other team with talent can throw the football downfield and pick up 20 yards. And that kind of puts your defense at a big disadvantage because even if you are good against the run and you put the team behind the sticks, like we regularly saw USC get to like 3rd and 8 and then just throw for 12 yards to a wide open receiver downfield. And I think that's kind of why I see a little bit of difference in like Walters last year had some talent in the secondary. He had Dylan Thieneman. Like he had some higher pedigree guys and some guys that actually have real talent. I mean, Dylan Thieneman was an All-American. He's going to be a high draft pick. He's playing pretty well at Oregon right now.
Had the game-sealing interception against Penn State.
Right. And so a guy like that just kind of gives you a floor to a defense, and it doesn't even matter how bad schematically Walters was. He had an All-American safety back there to kind of, as bad as the defense was, give things a floor. And I don't think Odom has that. And so I think that leads to some of this. And like that's part of why you see the bad tackling is because the linebackers aren't good. The linebackers are slow. They're not instinctive. Even if they're put in a spot pre-snap to give themselves a good shot at making the play, they're not instinctual enough to actually be there when they need to be there to make the play.
Yeah. You mentioned Thieneman. I mean, we've talked about like Will Help, Cole Brevard transferring out, guys who are making an impact on, Texas and Clemson and Oregon. And as bad as the defense was last year, you did have that high-end talent at a few positions that you just don't have this year. And the talent defense is probably a little bit better than it was last year, but if it's only a little bit better, but you lose that high-end talent, is the product on the field going to be any better? Probably not.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of why, like, you were working with the bare cupboard and you brought in some more mid-majory level transfers in the secondary, and they just aren't capable of covering the high-end Power 5 talent. I don't think that's an indictment on Barry Odom's system. I think it makes it really hard to design a system when you can't play zone, you can't play man. If you blitz, you're getting torched over the top. If you don't blitz, the quarterback's got 3 days to throw a pass. It puts you in a really tough position as a coach. And it's why I'm really eyeing this 3-game stretch against Rutgers, Minnesota, and Northwestern, because I think there's a chance that you see the team look more like the team you saw kind of against SIU, where it was like maybe a little closer talent wise, but I think you'll see some more success, especially like on the defensive side of the ball when they're playing a team, not quite as talented. I mean, when you talk about USC, you talk about Mayava, who's probably a first-round draft pick at some point. Mekhi Lemon has looked incredible through the first few weeks. I mean, even against Illinois, who I know you mentioned me offline, you think Illinois is really talented compared to Purdue. I mean, he torched Illinois every bit as bad as he torched Purdue. They couldn't cover him either.
More, yeah.
So it's almost like, and then you talk about Notre Dame, they've got a 5-star quarterback in CJ Carr, who looks phenomenal through 4 games. He looks like one of the best freshman quarterbacks in the country. And they've got a proven group of receivers who have been productive in the past. played some high-level teams who I think that the pendulum is swinging the other way in our eyes right now in a negative direction, as it had a little bit in the first couple weeks when everybody wanted to celebrate this team and how good they looked against inferior competition. To me, it's almost swung the other way where they look completely outmatched, and that says more about the roster, and that's more about what we kind of knew what this team was going in.
Yeah, I mean, our leading tacklers against Notre Dame were Miles Lusher and Taj Rael, who you might recognize as our starting safety duo. That's not good if your safeties are leading the team in tackles. They had 19 combined tackles between them. That did include a sack that Slusher had. And speaking of Taj Rael, I mean, we're starting a guy who was benched at Memphis last year at one of the safety spots. Like that's just sort of the level of talent this defense has right now. And he had the scandal that broke before the year, and the Purdue staff kind of hand waved it away, which I guess we'll see long term. That might not be a great reflection on this coaching staff if they're willing to keep a guy around like that. But it also probably just tells you, like, if they have to play this guy, there's no one behind him who can even do what he does. And he had 9 tackles. He was cleaning things up in the back end because he had to against Notre Dame.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all knew from the very beginning this is a bare cupboard situation. There is, outside of Maccabee, and I don't even really want to count Ryan Brown because he left. Odom had to get him back. Odom had to recruit him back essentially as he would another transfer quarterback. So I think really the only thing left over was kind of Devin Maccabee, and I guess you can count like Armand Branch maybe. That was
Maccabee was the only returning starter.
Yeah, I mean Maccabee was right. Armand Branch was a little bit of a higher pedigree recruit, younger guy, but he didn't get reps last year. So
didn't play at all.
Cupboard was completely bare, and that's going to end up with holes on your roster. And I think we're seeing that in a big way with the defensive the defensive backfield.
I mean, that's the main thing in favor of Barry, right? Like Ryan Walters was so bad as a coach last year. There was so little talent left by the time Odom took over. Like all of the good players we had, talk about Thieneman, Brevard, Will Helt, Max Clare, like all of those guys, like the few receivers who were producing, even Ryan Brown, like I said, initially transferred to North Carolina before deciding, I guess that was even more insane situation than the one he just left.
I'm looking back on it. I didn't think I'd say this. He probably made the right decision, even though Purdue hasn't had the greatest first few weeks.
Truly. And, he was left with nothing, and he got a late start in the portal too. Purdue did take a little bit longer than I think they wanted to end up hiring him, and he wasn't able to bring that many guys from UNLV. A lot of those guys were like already seniors anyway, or went elsewhere. I know they had one of their starting safeties that I really wanted, was hoping we could get ended up at Missouri, where he's been phenomenal. So, there's a limit to how much he was always going to be able to do in his first year, right? And he has a track record. He won at Missouri, he won at UNLV. Like he's able to turn programs around, and I don't think there's anything we've seen through 4 weeks that makes me doubt that he can still be the guy. My cynicism here is just that I don't think we've seen anything to prove he can be yet, and that's why I do think we want to be a little bit more cautious and sort of anointing him as like, oh, we know we got our guy. I don't think we do yet, but we'll see. I mean, you mentioned this upcoming stretch. We play, so we'll get to the Illinois game a little bit. We'll do a mini preview of that here in a minute. But after that, we play Minnesota, Northwestern, and Rutgers in 3 games in a row. So we're at Minnesota, at Northwestern, home against Rutgers. Now, Northwestern is probably the only team outside of UCLA that everyone would agree we're better than. Now they do have a win, but it was against UCLA. So, Minnesota just beat Rutgers. Rutgers 0-2 in the Big Ten. Kalik Manis, their quarterback, one of the biggest surprises of the Big Ten season. I think he's been phenomenal. Leads the Big Ten in passing yards right now. So all 3 of those games, I think, are going to be a challenge. But those are 3 winnable games, and how Odom and how this team performs in those games is really going to matter a lot, I think.
Yeah, I kind of want to talk large scale about Barry Odom, and I was curious if you had ever looked at his actual year-by-year records at Missouri.
Not recently, but I am familiar with them.
So do you know what his year one record at Missouri was? And I think that actually Missouri and Purdue have somewhat comparable situations as programs. They're both in conferences that have powerhouse football programs that they will likely never really touch, especially not on a large scale basis. But there's very much room for like successful years. When you get a good class in and kind of have success.
Sure.
Straightforward.
I think wasn't he like 3-9 in that first year?
It was 4-8.
4-8.
And I think that's a very reasonable year for Barry Odom in year one at Purdue. I think 4-8 is kind of what I expected going in. It's kind of what I expect still at this point. I don't think anything through the first 2 weeks has changed my thought process on that. I still think this team wins two of the three games we've talked about, maybe even pulls an upset here. I'm leaning more away from the upset polling at this point. I think the roster is just too limited. I'm not sure it happens. But the next year he went 7-6, and the year after he went 8-5. I think that's a very reasonable pathway for this team in this program. I think that's just kind of why I'm bought into Barry Odom, is that I've seen this kind of exact style of program build at a similar program work with this exact coach. He had success at Missouri doing, not starting quite from as much of scratch as he did at Purdue, but I think there's a little bit more pathway with the transfer portal to quicker success. So I think that, it wouldn't shock me if he followed a similar trajectory in those first 3 years as he did at Missouri. And I know Purdue fans, I'm not sure how many know this, but he's somewhat of a familiar face. He did lead Missouri to a win in Ross-Ade Stadium with Drew Lock. I think it was 2017. I think is when they came to Purdue. 2018, something like that.
I think it was 2018, I want to say, because that was that crazy game where like David Lowe threw for 500 yards and it was like a 40-40 game or something like that.
Yeah, it was the game that it just came down to whoever had the ball last, basically, because neither team could get a stop in the second half. Both quarterbacks were just playing out of their mind. Drew Lock had a fantastic game himself, I'm pretty sure. But I think that Missouri is just what I lean on, and I think that I need to center myself in that most first-year coaches don't win right away, especially at a situation like Barry Odom found himself. Year
Absolutely.
one, nothing on the roster, brutal schedule too. That's not talked about enough. I mean, he's playing 5 or 6 top 25 level teams: USC, Notre Dame, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio State, Michigan.
Washington could end up there by the end of the year as well. So
yeah, I mean, those are 6 teams who are borderline top 25 or better. That's
7.
A brutal schedule to have.
7 of our 12 games are against teams that might end the year ranked in the top 25. Yeah.
And that's just an awful schedule to have as a coach with nothing when you get there. And so I think before we have large scale conversations, I think we're probably not even going to see that this year because the schedule was so tough with such a poor starting point. I'm curious to see what he does in the transfer portal this offseason. I want to see some momentum built. That's the big thing I'm looking for. And I still think that boils down to those 3 games in the middle. I think that's kind of what the narrative around the season is going to boil down to, is those 3 games. And I don't think we're going to learn a whole lot else about this team outside of those 3 games.
I agree. At Minnesota, at Northwestern versus Rutgers. I haven't checked lines on those games. It'll be a little inaccurate this far out. We're still 10 days away from Minnesota, which is the closest one. My guess is we're going to be underdogs against Minnesota for sure on the road, and probably Rutgers Northwestern could go either way. I think those will be pretty close to pick-ems. If I had to guess, we'll probably be favored against Northwestern and maybe very slight underdogs at home to Rutgers. But it wouldn't surprise me if we were favored in both of those games. So that kind of comes back around to the question of, how well do we need to do in those games to feel good about his first season? I won't even project confidence. Like, I think that's a different question, but like a successful first season 4-8, I think we both agree is kind of what we expected, par for the course. Maybe not something to get super excited about, but you feel pretty good. 5-7, I think you'd feel great. Obviously you'd love to get that win. If we have 5 wins going into the Indiana game, it really doesn't matter how good Indiana is. You're still going to wish you could get that one, but 5-7, I think would be overachieving. 3-9, I think would be disappointing. and that's very possible to lose two of those three. At which point, 3-9, you're probably less optimistic going into year two than you would have been otherwise.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. 2-10, and I'm really concerned. And I'm probably going into year two thinking, something like we need to see a big improvement in year two. Otherwise, I think it's time to move on pretty quickly because I think in this day and age, if you're winning 4 games in year two and you won 2 in year one, it's time to move on. And I don't think that's what's going to happen. I don't even think we're going to see 3-9. I think we still see 4-8. 3-9, I think I'm going into year two a little concerned. I'm a little bit like, I don't think this is the guy. I'm willing to see it out, but something has to change. 4-8 is kind of like, I think that's exactly what we expect this staff to be. I'm not going to feel a ton of optimism going into year two unless, he does really well in the transfer portal or something like that. But I don't think that there's any cause for concern. I think it's just kind of, he had a very limited roster year one, did what he could with it. Now let's see what he can do in year two. This team goes 5-7. I think I go into year two thinking this is the guy moving forward. He had a really limited roster. He did everything he could with this roster. If this team somehow finds a way to go 6-6, I think I'm ready to enter extension talks. Like, I don't think it's going to happen. I think that this team is a ways away from 6-6, but 6-6 with this football team would have me very excited. And that would be winning all 3 of those games that you kind of expect to be gettable at least, or competitive football games, and then getting an upset. And that would be probably best case scenario year one.
I absolutely agree. I think, 4-8, like you said, it's like very much middle of the road. What we expected. Not anything to get super excited about, but also nothing to be concerned about. Just like, yep, that's kind of what we expected in year one. That's sort of what we would expect from a guy like Barry Odom, even with a Bear cover to come in, win 4 games with this absolutely ridiculously loaded schedule, and just be like, okay, it's all going to come down to year two. Like, some guys are productive, some guys will stick around. Like, I'm sure Ryan Brown will be back in that case, that scenario, and you can kind of build an offense around him, and maybe Ahmad Branch, Nitro Tuggle. We'll see. I mean, the defense is probably going to need a pretty massive overhaul no matter what. But, you're hoping you get some pieces on offense that you can build on going into year two. 5-7, and you're really excited. It means you probably went 3-0 in that stretch, or you got a major upset later in the season. And either one of the scenarios is reason to be excited. And yeah, 2-10, 3-9, 2-10. I think there would be conversations about firing him after 1 year. I don't think they're going to do that, because I think that would just land them in the same position of Bear covered. Coach is going to come into an impossible situation, probably win 3 games, and you're having the same conversation again. So I think they're going to give him a second. But if they're like 2-9 going into the last week, and there's rumblings of like, oh, Purdue has a new coach they want already lined up and a plan, like, I'd be open to seeing that. Like, I kind of want to see what that looks like.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen, for the record. I think 2-10
Absolutely not, no.
I think this team's a long ways away from 2-10, and I kind of think that speaks a little bit to Barry Odom and what he's done so far. I think that he's kind of shown this clear baseline of it's going to be a competent football team. Like, I don't think that we're ever going to get a team that's just downright uncompetitive from the kick in every game but the FCS game. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that Barry Odom's a better coach than that. 5-7 to me, that if they go 3-0 in that 3-game stretch, I think what that says to me on a large scale is that this year is largely a product of the roster. The coaching staff is clearly more than competent. If they win every game that is really equal, like where Purdue is either similar caliber or better roster wise, I think that speaks really, really well for the future of Purdue football. And I think that's kind of how I analyze coaches, is what do you do in comparison to teams of similar talent level? I think so far Odom has killed teams of lower talent level and, kind of been dismantled by teams of much higher talent level. So with that, it goes back to that 3-game schedule, like we've mentioned. So I think with that, we've talked a lot about large scale, and I think it's time to, talk more about this specific matchup with Illinois. I'll start it off. Illinois is coming to Purdue, ranked 22nd in the country, and I'm looking for the spread right now. I believe ESPN has it at a 9.5 spread. Illinois minus 9.5. It opened at minus 7.5, which is a little low, honestly, in my opinion. I kind of expected it to be a little higher than that. It doesn't shock me that the line was bet up. How do you kind of feel going into this matchup?
Yeah, I was pulling up the odds and I thought it was a typo. So I've been spending the last 2 minutes like Googling different lines trying to find like there's no way this is just a 9.5 point spread. But it is. I think this is still a top 25 caliber team in Illinois. I think we saw against USC last week very similar teams, some suspect defenses, especially with Xavier Scott out for Illinois and Kamari Ramsey out for USC. Both of those players do so much for those defenses in the secondary, especially. But very prolific offenses. Illinois doesn't have the NFL prospect at quarterback that USC does. A very veteran guy in Altmaier who can execute the offense and make some NFL caliber throws. I'll say that too. Like this isn't just like veteran college quarterback. Like he's probably going to get drafted to be a backup in the NFL because he has some of the traits you want to see in the production in college. They don't have the receivers. Like there's no Pat Bryant on this team or Isaiah Williams from the last couple of years. Still, this is a prolific veteran offensive line. They're probably going to be able to run extremely effectively against us, especially with Faison in the backfield. Like that guy is just going to run through all of our linebackers probably all afternoon. So the offense in particular, I think, is a pretty scary proposition to try and stop.
Yeah, I think that's the downside of this matchup for Purdue is Illinois' running game. I just think the Illini are going to be able to kind of run all over this Purdue defense. I don't know. Do you know if Hank Beatty is playing for them? I know that he had some injury stuff against Indiana. I don't know fully how healthy he is.
Let's see if they've listed him.
Because I do think if he's out, Illinois is kind of they already are kind of limited.
Okay, he was oh wait, no, that was last week. But,
did he play last week?
He did.
Okay, then I would guess he's active for the Purdue game.
Okay, yeah, so he is cleared for the Purdue game. So he was dealing with an injury last week leading into the Indiana coming out of the Indiana game.
Yeah, that's what I didn't watch the USC game closely enough to know if
he was out there against USC. I thought you were referring to something that happened. No, he was cleared for practice. He left the game with shoulder injury, came back against Indiana, played against USC, was dealing with some soreness throughout the game. Saw it beginning of this week he was cleared again for practice, so he should be good to go against Purdue.
I was going to say it seemed pretty touch and go from the Indiana game. I just didn't know enough about the USC game to know if he had ended up playing. He's pretty clearly the receiving threat to be worried about, I think. I think that's kind of where Illinois is lacking on offense is in the receiver room. They've got Beatty, who's one of the more productive receivers in the country, but I don't think that he's like a, alien talent type wide receiver that's just going to be impossible to cover.
He's extremely effective against zone coverage, though. He's not like the one-on-one like Justin Jefferson, like just absolutely impossible to cover. But he's so smart. He finds soft spots in the zone, finds open spots in the field. He knows how to run routes and to play with leverage. Like he's going to be a problem for these corners to try and cover for sure.
Yeah, I do think he'll be a problem. I think it bodes a little bit better than like the Mekhi Lemon, who will kind of just out athlete Purdue to a point where there's no answers. I do think there are somewhat of answers for a guy like Beatty. I do think he'll still have success because this Purdue secondary stinks.
Yeah. I wouldn't compare anyone to Mekhi Lemon. He's the second best wide receiver in this class, not only because Jordan Tyson's going absolutely nuclear for Arizona State. He's going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft most likely. Of course, we weren't able to cover him. That's not really an indictment in our secondary. Yeah.
I do think, but my larger point was more, I do think the secondary there are a few things the secondary could do against Beatty, I think, in a way that they couldn't really do against a athletic freak type. I don't think they're good enough for it to matter a ton, but it's just more along the lines of I do think that Illinois' running game is what's going to kind of gash Purdue here.
Yeah,
I think Fagan, his combination of size and speed is going to be a real problem for a linebacker core that isn't particularly huge, isn't particularly great at tacklers, and aren't particularly quick. That's a bad combination when matched up against a running back like Fagan. I do think the pathway to success for Purdue, though, is kind of on the offensive side of the ball. Illinois has had some struggles covering. And with that, Aaron Scott's also out. He's by far their best player on either side of the ball. Incredible corner. He's one of the better NFL talent corners kind of in the country this year, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's really good news for Purdue that he's not playing. I think that being able to throw the ball, being able to move the football is a real possibility for this Purdue offense.
Yeah, 100% with you. Xavier Scott, not just the best player on Illinois, one of the best players in the country, especially on defense. He can play in the slot. He can play at safety, which is where Illinois hasn't playing a lot. He can play outside corner in a pinch. Dude's everywhere. He's very much in that mold of like Devon Witherspoon, who they had a couple of years ago, who's now the Seahawks. So just this defensive matchup chess piece. And the fact that he's not going to be playing in this game is, like I said, it's huge. It's the single biggest injury that can move the needle in this game. Because, yeah, I do think Purdue is going to be able to move the ball against this Illinois team if the offensive lines that will hold up. That's kind of the one thing. Illinois' defensive line is pretty good, and there's a chance they just put so much pressure on Ryan Walters that quarterback Ryan Brown, so much pressure on him that the offense can't easily function. But I mean, we saw what he was able to do against Notre Dame and USC. We were still able to put up points against those teams. And I think both of those teams have better defensive lines than Illinois, even if Gabe Akis is maybe the best individual player on any of those lines. So,
yeah, I mean, I know going into the Purdue game, and I'm sure coming out of it, USC led the country in sacks. There's no way that having a 6 or 7 sack game, whenever it was against Purdue, put them into the second spot. But so I think when talking about it, even against a USC defensive line that is probably the best pass rush defensive line in the country, at least it has been through the first few weeks. Notre Dame, another team that just has incredible talent and depth at defensive line. I think this team has seen better defensive lines and still been able to put up points and move the ball somewhat. And so I think that bodes well for playing Illinois. The bigger concern for me is running the football. This team had 0 success running the football against Notre Dame. I'm not sure that changes against Illinois. I think a guy like Akis kind of blows up the run game against Purdue. I'm not sure that this offensive line has an answer for a guy like him, even if they have an answer for the rest of Illinois' defensive line. I think Akis is just kind of one of those guys who's going to give Purdue a lot of problems. He's going to be everywhere. He's going to be blowing plays up. The run game, I think, is really going to struggle with that.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if Ryan Brown throws 40, 45 passes in this game. I think we're going to see like a lot of like short screen passes, jet sweeps, little pop swings to try and like get the ball on the perimeter in lieu of a run game. Because you're right, I don't think this offensive line was barely able to generate movement against like Ball State and Southern Illinois. Like there's no way they're gonna be able to against Illinois, who might be the best run defending defensive line we've faced so far. That's going to be a problem. I will say the over under here in this game is 57.5. If you're looking to bet this game, I would heavily bet the over here. 57.5. Like, we'll get to the predictions here in a minute. I think both offenses are going to have some success. Purdue scored 26 against Notre Dame, or 30 against Notre Dame, and even 17 against USC. If we're in that range, I think the over hits pretty easily.
Yeah, and I would lean closer to the 30 points we scored against Notre Dame than the 17 we scored against USC. I think USC's defense causes some more problems for Purdue. I think their offense was able to kind of control the ball more than Illinois will be able to, just because I think that I think USC has just a few more weapons, a few more options on offense that they can kind of spread the ball out, churn the clock. They don't need chunk plays to kind of keep the ball away from Purdue. They were perfectly happy playing into the Purdue style.
The one thing I will say that might affect this hitting, if you're talking over, if Illinois' run game is dominating, this game might be a lot shorter, with just fewer possessions than you might expect.
I'm going to be honest. I think there's a chance Illinois' run game dominates so well that, if they average 7-8 yards a carry, like I think they might, similar to how Notre Dame did, I'm not even sure that slows the game down. They're going to be moving the ball so well. I think there's a chance that it could swing the other way in the run game, that it just turns into like explosive play after explosive play for Fagan. And that would be a really, really, really long day for the Purdue defense. And I don't think it would shorten the game as much as a lot of times you see running teams. But if I had to guess, I think this game kind of turns into like an air it out game. I think Purdue is – I wouldn't bet against Purdue trying to force Altmaier to beat them with the wide receiver weapons rather than just let them kind of impose their will on the ground. heat them up similar to how Indiana did. I doubt that they get nearly as much pressure as IU got on Altmaier, but I do think that was the way that Indiana was able to kind of dominate that Illinois offense a little bit. Was they brought a lot of pressure. They were bringing 5-6 every play. They ran a lot of stunts. Now they have a lot more talent than I think this Purdue defense has, but Illinois really struggled when they were under pressure against Indiana, and I think that's kind of the pathway to beating this Illinois team is shut down the run, force Altmaier to throw, and when he does throw, have pressure coming at him. I mean, there were a couple of times where he made good throws anyway because, as you spoke to it, I mean, he's probably going to be a long-time NFL backup. Like he's more than just a veteran college quarterback. He's got a pretty talented arm. He's going to beat you sometimes over the top, but I think that Purdue can beat Illinois as well on the offensive end. I think this is a high-scoring game. I just think the offenses really, really get humming because I do think that Purdue is going to try to force Illinois to beat them throwing the football.
Yeah. I mean, the one concern I have with that strategy is I don't think Purdue can stop the run or get after the quarterback. So that it's kind of like, well, if Illinois wants to run, they can, and if they decide they want to throw it, they can. I don't think we're really. I mean, like I said at the beginning of this, Purdue has not forced a punt since. What date was this? Purdue was not forced to punt since September 6th.
It's October.
It's fully October. It's going to be October 4th when this game happens. There's a chance we go over a month without forcing a punt because if you were to give me a betting line on how many punts Illinois takes in this game, I'm taking the under. There's no way we force a punt in this game. And yeah, take the over. Let's talk about the betting line here for a second. Let's get to predictions. Illinois is favored by 9.5. How do you see this game playing out? Who are you taking?
I can't get over the feeling that this game is that if this is the upset that Purdue pulls, if there's an upset Purdue pulls this year, I think it's this game. I think that when you look at it, this is the closest roster kind of. This is the least. How do I say this? I don't think this is the roster of a top 25 team that's just going to dominate Purdue at every single individual matchup. I think this team is really good because they're well coached and they play a good style of football. And, you know, they kind of beat you. It's almost a war of attrition. Like they force you to beat yourself. That may work out really well against Purdue because I do think Purdue has a little bit of a slight history of shooting themselves in the foot. I mean, go back to the USC game, all the turnovers and stuff like that. But I also think that style of team allows Purdue to stay in the game if they do play well. Because when your style relies on a team to shoot themselves in the foot, and that's how you beat teams, if a team plays well and is well prepared and comes in and executes well and doesn't shoot themselves in the foot over and over again, you're not going to blow that team out. That team is going to have a chance to win the game. And I think this is a good opportunity for Odom to kind of cement himself as, yeah, I'm a good coach too. My teams are going to be well coached. They're going to be well prepared. It's not going to be easy when you play Purdue. Unfortunately, I do think there's also a world where this Illinois team just kind of dominates. I think that Purdue has shown a history of shooting themselves in the foot. It wouldn't shock me if Brown threw a couple of costly interceptions, even if they aren't his fault. And I don't see a world where this defense finds many stops. I think Illinois covers that 9.5 line. I think if it gets over 10, if it gets like 10.5, I'll probably bet Purdue with the kind of possession there with the points changing. I think at 9.5, it's really begging you to take Illinois to cover that like 10 points. I do think this is the upset pick this year, but I'm going to go Illinois to cover.
Yeah, you mentioned the path for Purdue to win this game. You know, Illinois is a methodical team. They're explosive when they need to be, but they're going to try and beat you on the ground with good, solid football, well-coached team, well-coached defense, setting aside the Indiana game. And their secondary, I mean, they were down like 8 guys by the end of that game. The issue is that Purdue is one of the least disciplined teams in the Power Four right now. I mean, turnovers, sacks, dropped passes, penalties. Like, if Illinois wants Purdue to shoot themselves in the foot, Purdue is more than happy to oblige right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's why I led to the picking Illinois over the spread. Is I think you could talk about it right now.
It's tough too because we're coming off the bye week for Purdue. Like if there was a time for me to come out more energized, a little bit more focused, it would be now against a team we're not expected to beat. So I don't think it's impossible. Like you said, I think if we pick off any of these teams, aside again maybe from Washington right before rivalry week, it's going to be Illinois. I think the 9.5 point spread is a little bit crazy. I think it's an easy hammer for Illinois. If I'm predicting this game, I think it's probably in the 17 to 20 point range win for Illinois. I do think we can keep it close for a half. Like I think Purdue's offense is going to be explosive enough, and I think Illinois' offense is going to be methodical enough that they're not going to be, scoring 80-yard touchdowns every 3 plays, like it felt like Notre Dame was, to where, maybe it's like a 24-17 halftime score or something, where it's like, oh, Purdue gets the ball coming out of half, we score a touchdown, and then like Brown fumbles it off his foot at midfield, and it really feels like the game gets away from us after that. That's kind of similar to what I'm expecting, almost a little bit like the Duke game. I don't know if you remember that game back in week 2 where Illinois was kind of locked in a dogfight with a Duke team. They're much more talented than for 3 quarters, and then Duke's turnovers and lack of talent outside of the quarterback position really started showing up in that 4th quarter, and Illinois ended up running away with it by like 21 points.
Even going back to that Western Michigan game, I mean, I'm guessing this is the first time I mentioned this on the podcast. For those of you who don't know, I am a Western Michigan student. We played Illinois earlier this year in football. That game was 10-0, and Western Michigan had the ball on the 2-yard line with like 1st and goal. And at the end of the second half, I mean, I love Western Michigan. I cover the football team fairly closely. I'm pretty optimistic around Western Michigan football. We are nowhere close to the talent level of an Illinois, and that game was very Western hung around for a half. I could definitely see Purdue doing that before Illinois kind of comes out as, more awake. And I kind of forgot about this, but do you know Illinois' next game is?
Oh, I remember it being a trappy spot. Don't they play like
they get Ohio State at home next week?
Yeah, Ohio State. Yeah.
Coming off the bye week, I think I might actually. This is kind of a unique play. I think I might play Purdue money line in the first half, Illinois to cover 9.5 full time. See if I can get some kind of crazy odds on that. I do think this is a game that you talked about that Purdue comes out, especially off of the bye week, probably have a scripted drive or two where they look really, really competent on offense. You get into halftime, maybe even with a lead if you're playing well, and Illinois kind of comes out in that war of attrition of that Illinois style of team. And they come out a little lackadaisical in the first half, realize we can't just sleepwalk to a win, even though we've got Ohio State next week, halftime reset, come out, dominate because you're more talented. That's the game script I kind of see going. I do think that the spot is why you see the spread, and I think that it plays out like that, but I do think Illinois ends up covering in the long run.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. I mean, say what you will about last season. I mean, Ryan Brown, 1 point double overtime loss in Champaign. Now, I mean, that was Ryan Walters. He used to coach under Brett Bielema, so maybe that had more to do with it. He was definitely calling plays at that point for the offense, and he knows Bielema's defense. But yeah, I mean, Illinois beat Duke 45-19, and Ryan Brown is not Darian Mensah, who is my favorite quarterback in this draft class, but Mensah threw for 334 yards in that game. He was wheeling and dealing all over the field. They just had critical turnovers in some big spots down the stretch of that game, and the game just blew up in the 4th quarter. And I could definitely see something similar happening where Purdue's passing offense is able to move the ball against Illinois. Ryan Brown's making plays. I think they have more talented receivers than Duke does, and we're able to keep it close for a while. Maybe even pull a surprise if we're able to get like an early turnover, or Illinois misses a layup play and somehow forces themselves to punt. And then, we're able to go up 3 points, 7 points at the half. And, if you're able to do that, you never know what can happen in the second half. But I feel fairly confident that Illinois is going to cover the 9.5 pretty comfortably in the end.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that running game is just going to be the kind of difference maker in this matchup that Purdue won't have any answers for.
Yeah.
On that note, I think we'll close out episode 3. I excited to watch this Purdue football team at home again against Illinois. Always fun to get a rivalry game that, for the most part, usually is pretty close, especially if it plays out anything like last year, where we should be in for a pretty good game. And hopefully, can't wait for Purdue basketball season. That's kind of the sentiment I get at this point in the podcast. So we'll see you next week, Boilers.
3.5 weeks away from the Kentucky exhibition.
I know, SEC Network. That's called motion. This program has motion now.
There we go.
Very excited to watch this basketball team. Very excited to watch this football team against Illinois too. Maybe we'll get an upset.